Power on.
The following is a presentation of the Sovryn Tech podcast feed.
From days of long ago, from uncharted regions of the universe, comes a legend. The Legend of Sovryn Tech, podcast of the universe. A mighty tech show, loved by anarchists, feared by authoritarians. As Sovryn Tech's legend grew, peace settled across the galaxy. On planet Earth, a union of egoists was formed. Together with the open source, retro gaming, and liberty-loving communities, they maintain peace throughout the universe. Until a new horrible menace threatened the galaxy. Sovryn Tech was needed once more. This is the podcast of super host Dr. Brian Sovryn. Specially trained and sent out into the galaxy to bring back Sovryn Tech, podcast of the universe.
Woo, what you've got is the best in professional podcasting today. That's right, it is the man in triple black, the golden stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here to, we're going to do some Sovryn Tech, baby, and we've got some news to get into, including really some gazes. We'll pull out the crystal ball and look into the future. In fact, we're going to discuss more of Google's recent pivot, and I do think indeed it is that. Their recent pivot in business focus. We're going to get into that. Plenty of things to get into otherwise, including at the end during the climax, we will, I'll be delivering my review, spoiler-filled, by the way, review of Black Adam, the new film starring none other than Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. And what did I think of that? Well, if you were a Sovryn Tech patron, you got a bit of a preview on my thoughts on that on our Wednesday Q&A, which if you haven't signed up to be a patron yet, of course, go to patreon.com/SovrynTech. Link is in the show notes for that if you need it. And you get to join our Patreon-only Discord, which is always a great time. Now, all of that preamble out of the way, let's talk about Apple. No, you know what? Before we talk about Apple, let's talk about, and folks, real quick, like, we really will get past, or not past, but we will fade a bit on the consumer tech side of things, because ultimately, at least in what comes out of Silicon Valley, ultimately it's kind of boring, and we're basically just trying to survive the bullshit that they put on us. Man, the conversations, I know a lot of people, like, I've gotten emails, a lot of people want me to talk about, like, what's going on with Elon Musk and Twitter. Not even going to go there, like, or at least not right now. Maybe we could have a bigger conversation about it at some point, but like, if you don't realize that social media itself is the problem, I don't know what any commentary that I could say, that I could bring on about Elon Musk is going to help anything. I mean, the guy's a fucking idiot every day of the week, and he just won't take a day off. What do you want me to do? All right. He just won't take a break from being a fucking moron. Anyway, all right. Before we talk about Apple, I love podcasts. I really do. I mean, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, believe it or not. Like, I really don't. Boy, there was a time where I did. There was a time where, wow, I think my subscription list was like 100 podcasts. I don't know how the fuck I listened to all that. But the ones I do care about, like Security Now, and some others, I'm just ravenous about. And well, anyway, what do I use? I get asked this often. I think I even brought this up, and speaking of Patreon content, I recently brought this up. What do I generally use? I've generally used Pocket Casts, frankly, for years and years and years and years. I did walk away from it for a little while for a couple reasons. One of it being that, well, there was that huge version 7 refresh that happened. When was that? Was that like 2019 or something, where they just totally fucked up the UI? I don't know what the hell they were thinking, but they walked all of that back. I used AntennaPod for a while, but they walked all of that back. Then there was the issue where they got bought out by NPR, which I was just like, look, not that I mean, NPR actually puts out some fairly important content here and there. Okay. So it wasn't exactly, it's just, the problem was not necessarily my problem with, what, horseshit NPR is saying at any given moment. It was more that NPR's attitude that somehow they think they invented fucking podcasting, and I hate that haughtiness on their part, because it's not deserved and it's not fucking true. So, screw them. But anyway, Pocket Casts, about a year ago, actually ended up getting bought out by Automatic. Automatic being the company, of course, run by Matt Mullenweg. Automatic being the, shall we say, the steward and parent company to WordPress, amongst Tumblr, and other things. Simple Notes, and some other things. I initially applauded that, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's cool. It's certainly much better hands than NPR. Now, it's important to keep in mind that Pocket Casts was originally like independently developed, I think by only a couple guys, and it just ended up becoming, partly because Apple Podcasts was such a shit show as far as UI and features and everything. It ended up becoming insanely popular, particularly on iOS, as somewhat of, I mean, there's other, major podcast apps on that are actually Apple only, that are there, but Pocket Casts was really like, this was the super popular one on iOS because it improves so much over what Apple Podcasts was not doing, right? And it was on Android, and it became a dominant force there because also Google did not have their own podcast app, frankly, until recently. Even though now it seems a lot like they're looking, and they are like they're melding that into YouTube. Like really, like audio, basically audio only, podcast content on YouTube of all things. Not surprising when you have YouTube Music, but anyway, it's there, and they have some pretty. They've shared some interesting numbers over just how much audio only podcast content gets listened to on YouTube, and it's substantial. So, that's a direction for Google certainly to look at more, because YouTube is what it is. Anyway, so Pocket Casts, again, got bought out about a year ago. And I was really just waiting, because knowing Automatic and Matt Mullenweg and like, kind of their whole ethos, which of course is, they're like the company creed at Automatic is, quote, "I know that open source is the most powerful idea of our generation," end quote. I was really just waiting. That said, I was really just waiting for them to open source this whole thing. Because it's not something that has to be, I mean, it never needed to be closed source anyway, but it's not something that's just a couple of developers and they need to keep their best kept secret of this thing that was, doing so well. And I mean, it really like speaks to just how full of shit, like here's the funny thing. Like, so you got people who say, oh, NPR is the, it's the fucking liberal agenda, blah, 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 blah. And it's socialists and communists and all this. Well, if there were actually socialists and communists, they would have open sourced this thing as soon as they got their hands on it, right? Because frankly, any communist who doesn't support open source software and open sourcing fucking everything, in my opinion, is, a hypocrite and a goddamn liar. So NPR, it calls bullshit on NPR, but Matt Mullenweg comes out and finally makes it happen. And I'm really, really pleased about that. Will Pocket Casts end up on F-Droid at some point? I hope so. There's really no reason for it not to. I don't know that the web player version of it is entirely open source, but the app certainly is on iOS and Android. And I mean, there's a lot of advantages to this. They're claiming their own that it's going to help them out with, bug fixes and, opening the code up to the community to find those, of course, and even, send in the fixes. But I think the really exciting thing here is now they open sourced it under the Mozilla public license. So that is essentially forcing anybody that wants to fork this, and that's the most exciting thing to me. Anybody that wants to fork Pocket Casts has to keep it open source, through the MPL. And not to say that I think anybody really needs to fork it right now, but that's awesome that such a great goddamn podcast player, can be forked. As far as like open source, I mean, look, this is just another case because I think outside of, say, Apple and Spotify, and Automatic is aware of this, Pocket Casts is still probably the most popular podcast platform. And in many ways, it is sort of its own platform. In fact, it's the one thing I don't like about Pocket Casts is that it takes like an hour longer for a podcast that was just uploaded. Okay, it takes like an hour longer for it to show up in Pocket Casts, partly because they have their own algorithm and effectively their own platform that it gets shared through. So I get why it does that, but it's fucking annoying, frankly. But it is a full-on platform, and it is really the space, the app that could take on Spotify and Apple in any actually meaningful way, because I don't think that Amazon is delivering on that. Even with having podcasts available in Audible, which the UI on that is, I mean, frankly, it sucks. The way that it organizes podcasts, I mean, I really, really don't like it. Well, they fucked up the Audible UI multiple times over now. But also Amazon Music, like that's just, I don't imagine that that's used that often. So even if the UI on Amazon Music isn't so bad, and it's not, and hey, Sovereign Tech's everywhere, to get on Audible and Amazon Music, that's invite only. Sovereign Tech was invited. Now, like the UI is better on Amazon Music, but nobody uses it. So who cares, right? So really Pocket Casts is like, this is the platform that can genuinely take on Apple and Spotify. And now it has that open source ethos from the code up. And I'm super happy about this. I mean, this is a total win for the entire podcasting space, which I think podcasts are ultimately the last bastion of real freedom and entertainment. So this is an important front, as it were. I don't necessarily like to use military terms, but I'll go with it. This is an important front, an important theater upon which to have a powerful open source platform. And we have that now. And I'll implore you here, not that Automatic or Pocket Casts are a Sovereign Tech sponsor. I would certainly let them be if they wanted to be. But I would implore you here, if you haven't checked out Pocket Casts in a while, might be time to give it a look again. Because, you really I think just showing even the download numbers of support after this announcement. And this just happened. October 23rd, 2022. So, I mean, we're talking, what is that? Yesterday that this was officially announced, I believe. I mean, this is the right move. So, any way that I think we can really show the support there, because again, podcasting is such an important space. Videos, video documentaries and video essays and whatever, and video podcasts and all that shit that ends up on, YouTube or Twitch and other BS platforms. While great stuff is certainly being done there, there's a limitation to what can really happen there. As to where in podcasting, I really don't think those limits are there, because you can always self-host when it comes to podcasting. And most podcast apps, as long as you've got a feed, they don't really, you can usually manually add it in anyway, even if it won't show up in their search. This is such an important place to be in podcasting if you want actual truth and real information, and I would argue good entertainment to get out there. So, all right, now, while we're speaking of Apple, let's fucking talk about Apple. Because they've had an interesting week. So first off, today, this isn't what I'm going to start talking with, but we will get into today, October 24th, 2022, the day that this episode's getting released. They did launch, finally, iPadOS 16. Technically, they actually released iPadOS 16.1. We'll talk about more about why did they wait for 16.1 to finally release the update. We'll talk about that in a minute. But before we get into that, last week, they announced, and of course, everybody knew that this was coming. Not a surprise at all. They didn't hold a huge event. They just did a press release, which, me being in the PR biz, there's companies where a press release is the most important thing in their life. And then there are companies who can do full-on events at essentially, what is ultimately no cost, right? Like Apple can just announce an event yesterday and the whole world's going to watch the next day. They don't need the press machine around them because people can just watch Apple's own shit. They can do it all internally. They don't need a press release. So when Apple announces things with a press release, for them, it's not the most important thing in their life. Unlike other companies, for them, that's actually low bar, lowest rung on the ladder, meaning they don't even care enough to hold some kind of fucking event. And I think, honestly, the iPads that they announced, the hardware that they announced, a press release within context of Apple makes sense because none of this was really exciting. Now, I want to be clear here, okay, because I'm going to talk about iPadOS 16. I want to be clear here. I am an iPad user, okay? I have a 5th gen iPad Air. I get it. My thoughts on the iPad, and I also talked about this recently on the Wednesday Q&A on Patreon. Look, the iPad is like there ultimately there might as well not be any other tablets. Like there are, and the Kindle Fire is a great tablet for F-Droid, very specific for F-Droid, and of course they're inexpensive, which dynamite. Samsung does their thing, and if you're into Samsung's ecosystem, of course you know what you're getting. But really, Samsung tablets are mainly just for people who are into Samsung's ecosystem. Even no matter how good the hardware is, that's the only people that are, that they're going to reach. Everybody else, sure, like Nokia has, interesting tablets and whatever. And Google's going to be coming out with one, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But as far as like an actual tablet computer for computing, even Google's not competing in that space. Really, the iPad is it. It is just the dominant piece of hardware. And it has really earned that place in the market, created the niche in the first place in many ways. Even not to say that tablet computing was a new idea, right? Of course, we can go all the way back to Alan Kay and his Dynabook concept, which the iPad was trying to bring to life. And if anything, like tablet computing, what did Apple do? Apple did what it often does. It copied Star Trek, right? The iPod came out of Star Trek The Next Generation. That's admitted by the creators. The iPad came out of Star Trek The Next Generation. I don't know if they fully admitted that yet, but they might as well. So it's not like it's necessarily a new idea, but the iPad has really earned its place with both power, design, whatever else, as the tablet computer du jour. And it's probably not going to lose that anytime soon. I don't see Microsoft Surfaces flying off the shelves. They might be flying out of some football players' hands, but I don't see them flying off the shelves. So let's talk about what Apple is. What have they wrought? What have they given us for 2022 as far as their new iPads go? Of course, earlier in 2022. They gave us the iPad Air, like the one that I have, and that'll probably come into conversation. But let's talk about what they delivered. And essentially, we have two new iPad Pros, the 11-inch and the 12.9-inch, now that have M2 processors in them. And there is a new iPad 10, which is like it's the original iPad, but it's kind of like the 10th gen of it. Or would that technically be the 10th gen? Anyway, that it's the entry model, right? Runs at what, 449, something like that, depending upon what you get there. The big deal here, certainly for the iPad 10, which is the more interesting upgrade, even though it still has some very weird choices, is that they finally put USB-C on it. So no more Lightning port for that. We're going to talk about more in a minute, but the biggest jump for the iPad 10 is something that I know iPad users have been asking for, frankly, since the first, since the iPad 2, that being the camera being designed for landscape mode instead of portrait mode. So the forward-facing camera would be set for, where it's on the length of it. The length of it. Anyway, for the landscape length of it. As to where traditionally it's just like a smartphone where it's at the top of the screen, going tall-wise. Why they didn't do that if they're doing it with the iPad 10, why didn't they do that with the new iPad Pros? No idea. Overall, the iPad Pros, the addition of Thunderbolt 4, and some other, there's not a huge deal. There is a new feature with the Apple Pencil, okay, which is called Hover, which allows kind of quick features to come up, when you're getting close, not when the pencil touches the screen, but when it gets close to the screen. Okay, that's interesting. But that's it. Essentially the iPad 10 having a landscape camera and USB-C, that's the big deal there. As far as the iPad Pros getting the M2 processor, that's the big deal there. Okay, so here's the problem with the iPad 10. With the iPad 10, it still can't work with Apple Pencil 2. It only works the first generation. Fucking weird. What is that? It's an incredibly odd choice. Everything else about it, okay, those are some nice additions or whatever, but I find that to be very odd. And also it did not get an M1 processor. It got the A14, I believe. Okay, whatever. That's the same shit that's in iPhones, so, that's not that strange. Really, iPads having the M1 or M2 processors in them is, as I've said, pointing at that Apple wants the iPad, which I've been saying for 10 years now, Apple wants the iPad to become your computer. And they're kind of leaning away from MacBooks overall. Even though, MacBooks are phenomenal laptops, in their own right from a hardware standpoint and certainly from a battery life standpoint. But I ultimately what I'm saying here is with the iPad 10, there's nothing really revolutionary going on here. And with the iPad Pros getting the M2 here, here's the thing with that. And this is again, you're listening to someone. I'm not just complaining about Apple from the outside. I am someone who uses an iPad. I actually use my iPad a lot. And in fact, ironically, I use my iPad for fairly simple things. And what's crazy about that is that, so my 5th gen iPad Air, latest stuff, right? My fifth gen iPad Air, it's the 256 gig model in case, it's a Cadillac, okay? The very simple things I want it to do, it does them, what I would argue is very slowly. And the reason being is it's ultimately using apps coded for iPhones. Ultimately. There's some apps that are made specifically for iPad. And that's, slowly been a thing since the iPad Pro was originally introduced. But for example, I read comic books on my iPad Air. Gorgeous screen, and again, it does have plenty of power, but here's the rub. I have the apps that I use to read books and whatever, sometimes they're frankly fluky. If they're even going to open what I tell it to open, say out of the file manager. Or even if it's in the apps folder, right? So the issue here is nothing, or practically nothing, as far as software goes, as far as apps go, not operating system, but apps, as far as apps go, really take advantage of the M1s or the M2s. So who the fuck cares that there's an M2 in the new iPads? or the new iPad Pros. Like, nothing's even taking advantage of the M1, let alone the M2, and I didn't see like a dramatic difference in battery life. This is a gigantic problem. I find it frankly annoying that I have to constantly like clear the apps I want from cache just so that they will open up and do things. Now, this speaks to an overall problem with the Apple ecosystem, okay, or at least with the iOS, / iPad ecosystem. That is, if you are somebody who has your own media, as in has your own files, right? Your own movie files, your own MP3s, your own book files, whatever. And it's not something that goes through Apple or Amazon or whatever. Like iOS, iPadOS just doesn't do well with that ever. And Apple overall, just like the ecosystem overall, does not play well with that, right? Like usually you have to transfer through fucking iTunes just to get PDFs on your iOS device, on your iDevice. What the fuck? Yes, now fortunately, like iPadOS can handle external hard drives, which is a huge boon because now I can just, transfer flash drive to flash drive, which is how I like to do business anyway. But that's bullshit. And it really, really shows even on something with a goddamned M1 processor in it. Now, so there's an overall point to be made here, and we're going to get into an iPadOS 16 review here in a second, or quick review. There's an overall point here, which is, if you're looking to, you want to upgrade your iPad, I don't think you have any reason to upgrade your iPad because the software isn't there to take advantage of the genuinely incredible hardware. Like, I'm not knocking the hardware. I'm just saying that none of the apps are made for it. Huge problem. So I see no reason. I mean, hell, you can have an iPad too. And I think you're rocking fine. Well, okay, there's software support issues. I'm not saying that. But even if you have an iPad that's a few years old, I don't see any reason to upgrade to any of these things. Unless maybe you use it like as your laptop. But even then, like I'm saying, fuck. The app support, the apps are there, but the app support is not there. The app efficiency, the app's ability to natively take advantage of the hardware is just not there right now. So don't be in a rush to jump on any of these things. And again, it's really the iPad 10 is a huge leap from its previous gen, in certain features, but overall, especially with the iPad Pros, these are very iterative upgrades, which, like I said, why I'm not surprised that they announced it in a press release. Now, I guess I'll get into one other point. The amount of iPads that are available now, frankly, if Steve Jobs were still alive, like, he'd kill more than half of these. He'd kill 3/4 of these damn things. Like right now, so as far as what's officially supported and available for you to buy, not just supported, but available for you to buy, say from Apple.com, you have the iPad 9, the 10-inch, right? You have the iPad 10, also the 10-inch, the new one. You have the iPad Mini 6. You have the iPad Air 5. Then you have the new iPad Pro, and, with the M2, or that's the 11-inch, and then the 12.9-inch iPad Pro with the M2. And I imagine you can get last year's M1 versions of both iPad Pros as well. That's a lot of iPads. That's a fucking confusing amount of iPads, which, I can remember what it was like years ago. And you were lucky if you had 2 or 3 models of iPad, which is what I think God intended, or at least what Steve Jobs intended, though some people would equate those two. Yeah, Steve Jobs would not put up with this. Like, you're creating, and I get what Apple's doing. They're trying to make it look like, because they won't let any other manufacturers come in, they're trying to make it look like you have the illusion of choice and make it look like they have like a hardware ecosystem when really they don't. I understand that. And I get it from a business and a marketing perspective. But at the same time, I think that kills Apple's strength. Like, you could essentially, like, really, you should have the Pro, one Pro model, have the 12-inch Pro model, have the Air, and then have the mini, and that should be it. Like that, then it makes sense. It should only be those three. This is not a good business model on Apple's part. And do I get where they're coming from in that, like right now there's, chip shortages, supply chain issues and all that. And is that why like the M2 iPad Pros were so iterative and didn't even like change the casing? Same with the iPad Air from 4th gen to 5th gen. Yeah, of course that's what's going on. But then, don't bullshit people with nonsensical upgrades or updates. They're not even upgrades. I don't want to call them upgrades. They're just updated versions of whatever horseshit came out last year or the year or 2 years previous. So I don't get it. Like, it's not a smart move. It's like they're trying to, they're faking it. They're trying to fake the idea that, oh no, we're still developing, we're still doing shit, when ultimately, well, anyway, we'll see what happens in the future, because, the best thing to happen to Apple is Johnny Ive going away, thankfully. But they just lost their other designer too, and they don't have anybody else coming in. Well, they probably don't need anybody else. Why? Because again, like, they can't afford to come up with dramatic new designs right now, because every tech giant's hurting, on the bottom line. So let's talk a little bit about iPadOS 16. Of course, iOS 16.1 also came out today on October 24th, 2022. And okay, so as soon as 1 p.m. hit, I'm upgrading. I go through the process, smooth upgrade process, no issues, never really has been. Again, I've been using Apple devices for years, even though I don't often talk about them. I've used an iPod Touch for a very long time. That was, by the way, like a 2019 model. So very up to date. And, even before that, it's using others. Anyway, point being, like, I've been on top of this. I'm a tech journalist. I'm a tech podcaster. I've got to know what the other, what all the tech giants are up to, right? So I know I use these devices, and where they make sense, I keep using them. For example, like with an iPad. So iPadOS 16, once again, okay, now most of the improvements, I would argue, were relevant to iMessage, which I don't use. Because I don't have, I don't use an iPhone. And also I am such a staunch supporter of getting out of the SMS/iMessage duopoly, and moving on to things like, Signal, Telegram, whatever it happens to be, Threema, take your pick. I don't use iMessage. Even if I could, I wouldn't. So a lot of it had to do with that, where now you can edit text in iMessage and blah, 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 which, by the way, so real quick before we go further, it was so funny. Samsung released One UI 5 today. So Samsung phones are getting Android 13 today. And Microsoft also released Android 12L. Shows how up to date they are. Released Android 12L for the Surface Duo and Surface Duo 2, their smartphones. I don't think that's, I don't think that's an accident. I don't think that's coincidence that both Samsung and Microsoft decided to release major updates to OS updates to their devices on the same day that Apple's doing it. And they did it ahead of time, well before 1 p.m. Obviously, they were trying to get a jump on the news cycle here. So anyway, iPadOS 16, a lot of it had to do with iMessage. None of that is really exciting for me. And if you're into iMessage, you know what that's about, and you're doing it. With Mail. Now, so they added some interesting stuff to the Mail app. I've applauded, other than the fact that Apple is scanning your emails for what images you're sending. I've applauded overall, Apple's privacy features within their email ecosystem in general for a very long time. Now, essentially what they've added in with Mail on, with iPadOS 16 is like these are features that are very common with software like Mixmax or Boomerang, where you can do like remind me's. You can get, automatic suggestions to follow up, say if you haven't heard from somebody in like 3 or 5 days. You can get, automatic alerts. There's all kind. You get cancel delivery of a message, like lots of these little features that frankly have been a part of other, email services for quite some time. But I'm glad that they're there. Nice. Okay. So, there was that certainly came along. There were, with the iCloud shared photo library, that was the thing. As I talked about on the recent Wednesday Q&A for Patreon, uploading photos to any of the tech giants, uploading photos to the cloud, unless it's your own NAS, is a recipe for disaster in your life. And we've covered that in recent episodes of Sovereign Tech as to why. So nothing there really exciting me. Some passkey support ended up becoming a thing in Safari on iPadOS 16. I have not done my review yet of passkeys. I'll save it for that. But that ended up coming in. Sadly, a couple of the big features that everybody was or some people I think were excited for, didn't come with this. And we're having to wait till like end of the year, maybe. They might just say, oh, we're going to need more time. Again, we were supposed to get iPadOS 16. We got iOS 16 in September. We were supposed to get this back in September. But this speaks to it. So Freeform, which is like their whiteboard app, collaboration app, that isn't coming until later. Also, the ability for the iPad Air and iPad Pros to connect to an external monitor did not launch. And this one is the biggest fail of them all. Because what did launch with this, and what arguably was the reason for the delay, was to get what's called Stage Manager working properly on iPadOS. Stage Manager is a way of multitasking where, like, you have, like say on let's say on an iPad Pro, an 11-inch iPad Pro, you will get like a smaller version of the app that will take up 3/4 of the screen, and then the bottom quarter of the screen, or the bottom eighth, we'll say, the remaining, whatever, 2/8 or something, whatever. What remains, the bottom part of it, will be a dock that kind of looks like macOS, frankly, but it'll be a dock where you can open, the hottest apps, or, whatever you have set as favorites. And then on the left-hand side of the screen will be the most used 4 apps that you have that you can quickly flip to. Now, I like the idea of trying to figure out new ways to do multitasking on a tablet computer, and especially on a smaller screen. And in some ways, I feel like they're kind of copying what Ubuntu was trying to do with Unity in some ways. Okay? But regardless. So, the problem here is this looks interesting, but in execution on a small screen, it still doesn't really work. Where it is going to work is when you can connect your iPad to an external monitor. But you can't do that right now. And I think this is the biggest fail, because this is the biggest, I would say, the largest feature change for iPadOS 16. But then where it could really shine, isn't available yet. So you're not exciting anybody with Stage Manager right now, because what I think it's really meant for, again, which is an external monitor, a large external monitor, that feature's not there yet. So I think that's, frankly, it's a total fail to not have that. Regardless, there was a nice new weather app, and really it is a beautiful weather app. I'll give it that. Of course, they're phasing out Dark Sky as a separate app. But yeah, I mean, that's the deal with iPadOS 16. If you weren't, like, this doesn't make any sense. I think it was kind of a failure to delay iPadOS 16 to come out. Especially because Stage Manager just, it's not ready for prime time. It's not there. Prime time, for it to be ready for prime time, it needed that external display feature, and that's just not happening. But overall, again, the biggest problem here, and that none of this is really resolving, is the app issue. The fact that apps are not optimized for the amount of just raw balls that this hardware has. I'm not knocking the hardware. Hardware's fucking awesome. Just none of the software is really ready. Even the OS ultimately isn't ready, right? Because you can't even take advantage of an external display. I mean, the fact that they're going for the external display, again, this is just more proof, like I've said, that they really want iPads to replace your computer. Can an iPad do that? That's a conversation for another time that I want to have. And I do have thoughts about the matter of whether or not you can do that. but we'll have to talk about that in the future. Anyway, the moral of the story here for the Foreplay, talking about all of this Apple stuff, if you're feeling a need to update or upgrade, let me belay that notion, let me belay that notion. Like you don't need to at all. There's really nothing that exciting going on here. And Apple even frankly seems to know it. That's why they announced it all in a press release last week. So, all right, we will be right back with some more Sovryn Tech. We've got some wild stories to get into, and I'll be back with more. This is Sovryn Tech. Have you had enough of the big-name web hosting services that are long on promises but short on bleeding-edge features, uptime, and customer service? Or are you just looking for a performance boost for your business's online presence? The answer is Agorist Hosting. Agorist Hosting is the agile web host that offers full concierge service from website redesign, full e-commerce solutions, even custom apps for your Shopify store, and more. All with security, reliability, redundancy, and privacy at the forefront. Oh, and those bleeding edge features? How about hosting your data in a decentralized system like IPFS, the Interplanetary File System? Good luck getting that from those other guys. Agorist Hosting is ready to take your web presence into the future. Head over to agoristhosting.com to get started. That's AGORIST hosting.com. agoristhosting.com.
Story of the week.
So let's just move right along to the other tech giant, what some would argue is Apple's main competitor, that being Google. I am going to assuage some of these notions in a more abstract conversation that we're going to have during the Listener's Choice segment. But for now, let's talk about what we've got here. And this is from last week, October 18th, 2022. I'll be reading from 9 to 5 Google with Ben Schoon reporting on it. And here's the headline report: Google doubling down on Pixel with added focus on its hardware as Samsung bleeds. So let's read it. With the launch of the Pixel 7, Google made it clear that it had a vision to make devices in its own hardware family work better together. Now a new report claims that Google is planning to, quote, double down, end quote, on Pixel phones and its own hardware, betting on its own success over partners. Google's ambitions in the smartphone market have been moderate success over the years. We can skip ahead on all of that. According to a new report from The Information, Google is doubling down on Pixel phones and its own hardware. This apparently includes moving product development and software engineering staff to work on Google-branded devices rather than features for non-Google hardware. Google, of course, provides the base software layer for virtually every Android phone on the planet, with new features often arriving for devices from all brands. This move supposedly won't result in reduced support for partners such as Samsung, but we can already see some of its effects. An internal document seen by The Information showed that recent decisions to axe Google Assistant support on some Wear OS smartwatches, as well as lessening support for assistant features such as driving mode, were apparently a part of this shift within the company. Apparently, Google has a short list of Android brands, quote, for which it should develop the best Google services, end quote. The list includes Samsung, OnePlus, and Xiaomi at least. Another impact we've already seen is the less important, quote-unquote, less important Google-made devices. Last month, Google shuttered plans for its own Chrome OS laptops, and it's become obvious that Google is pushing away from Fitbit smartwatches amid the launch of the Pixel Watch. The inspiration for this shift in Google's mindset apparently comes through two factors, starting with Samsung's performance in the market. Apparently, Google is, quote-unquote, concerned that Samsung is losing customers to Apple. iPhone shipments overtook that of Android phones in the US for the first time ever in 2022. Comments from a senior Google search executive, Sissy Hessio, hope I pronounced all that right, reveal that CEO Sundar Pichai believes that Google's efforts in making its own hardware, quote, best positions Google to be protected, end quote, from shifts in the mobile market. So, Stallion breaking in, I want to talk about this. and I might read a little bit more, but this completely proves my prediction and my point that Google is looking to become. We've talked about this over the past 2-3 episodes. Google is looking, they're pulling an Apple. They want to become a hardware company because everything else they're doing isn't working. Now you say ultimately Google is an ad company. You're right. For now, we're going to talk more about Google being an ad company or not being, or no longer being an ad company, or at least not being the advertising giant that it once was when we get into listener's choice. So we'll put a pin on that. Okay. But Google is looking to become a hardware company. Here's what's going on. If you didn't grok everything that this story was saying, of course, link is in the show notes. With Apple, and this is what I talked about, we knew that story about Apple or, overtaking Samsung or overtaking Android in general in the US for the first time ever. Okay. We've brought that point up many, many times. So effectively, Google is sweating the fact that Samsung is letting Apple eat its lunch. And Google's like, well, we can't afford this. Like, our entire company rests on being a part of the smartphone market. And so Sundar Pichai is rolling up the sleeves and taking matters into, and Google's taking matters into its own hands. Saying, fine, if you guys can't deliver, a smartphone experience that'll blow everybody's mind, we'll do it. And, what's the Trojan horse here? Really, it's the A series within the Pixel line. And, the Pixel 6a, I got to imagine, is doing phenomenal numbers. And in fact, you can get that thing like on sale at certain places for, just a little over $200. That puts it into budget phone territory, but with all the quote unquote goodness, and I put that in quotes, I'm not saying that's the reality, but all the goodness of the Pixel line. But I want to be clear here. This is exactly because I got the emails. I heard the comments, people saying, yeah, but the Google graveyard. Google's going to, eventually, like, I'm not going to buy a Pixel phone because, even if it gets supported for 5 years, Google's going to, renege on that because they're going to pop it into the graveyard and they're going to pull Stadia and they're going to say, fuck you. So I'm not going to get invested in anything with Google. I had said there is effectively no way that they're going to give up on the Pixel line. I might not have used the exact words double down, but I bet I might have actually said the words double down on the Pixel line. And I said, no, they need to do this. They don't have a choice in the economic situation that we're in, as well as what's going on with, between Apple versus Samsung and so on. They have to do this. They don't have a choice. So my prediction, my speculation that what Apple's doing, after their October event, that what Apple's doing is, or what Google's doing is they're becoming Apple, just kind of in reverse, where, because what's Apple doing now? Apple's becoming an ad company. We're going to talk more about that. Apple's becoming an ad company, right? Which we covered in a recent Sovryn Tech. But originally they're a hardware company. Google is originally an ad company. Now they're becoming a hardware company. Are they going to succeed? Okay, that's a whole other conversation to have, whether or not they're actually going to succeed at this. But from their own internal documents, leaked or whatever, that's what they're doing. I was fucking right. Now, not only that, let's talk about this leak a little bit. I think this leaked document by the information, I think that was a controlled leak. Like Google themselves leaked it. Why? Because of the very reason that I had to start having this conversation of why the Pixel line isn't going anywhere in the first place. Which is, everybody's afraid that the Pixel line, the Pixel Watch, Pixel 6 or 7 or whatever ends up coming out is going to end up in the graveyard. They're going to can it at some point because it's not profitable. I think Google knew, especially after the closure of Stadia, not long before the announcement of the official announcement of the Pixel 7, they knew they had to assuage those fears, and I think this is exactly how they did it. Is they leaked an internal memo. So this wasn't like journalists getting their hands on something hot. This is controlled marketing. That's exactly what this is. Okay. Now, it still proves the point, and it's still a fact. It doesn't mean it's a lie. I think it's absolutely accurate. I think it was genuinely an internal memo, but it's one that, again, that Google put out there, on purpose, in a controlled fashion. So let's talk. I want to read a little bit more from Ben Schoon here around kind of the economic situation that we're in, which won't surprise anybody, but let me read it. Quote, the other part of the equation comes from the broader economic situation, as Sundar Pichai has expressed a goal to make the company 20% more efficient, end quote. That has led to hiring freezes and scaling back in other areas. Last month, Google cut down on its experimental Area 120 division by 50% and also announced that its Google Stadia cloud gaming platform would shut down in early 2023. Notably, too, Haseo also apparently has considered shifting some employees away from Android Automotive, a project that car makers such as Ford, Volvo, and more are using for native in-car operating systems. While that project is set to make Google upwards of $1 billion annually in the coming years, the amount is too, quote unquote, too small to make a meaningful difference in the company's bottom line. Alphabet's Google's parent company reported revenue just shy of $70 billion in quarter two 2022 alone. This doesn't affect the standard version of Android Auto, the report says. So they have Android Auto, which could make them over a few years $1 billion, and boy, that's just not enough. But I mean, it goes to show, like, they're thinking a very long game. I mean, it's preposterous that $1 billion isn't enough for a company, but okay. Whatever. So they're playing a very long game, and they're thinking, sure, it'll make $1 billion in a few years, but that's not enough for us in a few years. And even if that's bringing in money now, we have to think about what things are going to look like 5 to 10 years from now. 5 to 10 years from now, what do they plan on things looking like? That the Pixel is the competitor to the iPhone. Is that going to happen? Again, the success of all this, I don't know. But do I think they have the best shot? Yeah, sure. That doesn't mean Samsung's going to necessarily fall away. Part of the problem is, here's the thing. Samsung's model, and this will speak to what we're going to get into in Listener's Choice about ads. Samsung's model is not ads. Samsung's model, well, they sell fucking everything under the sun in South Korea. However, that's only one country on the entire planet where they sell that much shit. From everything from socks to toothbrush. Well, I don't know if they do socks, but I mean, they even build submarines, for fuck's sake. Samsung really relies, like, their business model is, you need to buy our next shiny piece of shit. That's Samsung's model. Okay, get you into their ecosystem, even away from Google's ecosystem, even though it's, built on top of Android. But I mean, we could get into how Samsung is pushing, and other companies as well, are pushing for smart TVs to actually use Tizen instead of Google TV. I mean, they're really, like, Samsung is playing ball with Google, even though, in this leaked memo, it's clear that Google will continue to give, like, the best features of Android. If anything, just features overall for Android, really for only a very few companies. In fact, it's funny, it's the same few companies that I've mentioned over and over again. If you need a smartphone, you either buy, if you're outside of the US, go ahead and go with Xiaomi. But if you're in the US, you either buy Google, Samsung, or again, you buy Apple. But I mean, that's hilarious. So those are the only companies that are going to end up getting, the latest and greatest features. Okay. So Motorola doesn't seem to be in this list. Nokia is not in this list. There's a slew that are not in this list. And OnePlus is there, which I've mentioned that as well, even though OnePlus is really, kind of fallen from what made it great in the first place. Anyway, so that's important. So they're still going to work with Samsung because they know they can't really leave it behind because Samsung is such a large part of the overall Android ecosystem. So they can't drop it. But it is funny because Samsung is doing its damnedest to distance itself from Google, certainly on a software standpoint. Granted, Samsung's the company that makes the Tensor processor. Maybe Google is eventually going to look into doing that on their own. I don't know. I could see that happening in the future. But eventually, I think Samsung's going to run into some trouble because their business model does not have a fallback, like a fallback profitability. What I mean by that is, so you take Apple, okay? Apple can take the time, the long game, to get into the ad business because they have the cushion of their tremendously profitable hardware business, right? And their app, the 30% they take on, the Apple tax. So on apps. So they've got that to fall back on. So they can try out new, they can get into a different market sector. Google has their incredibly profitable ad business, and it still is profitable today, to take the time to build a proper hardware business. Okay, so they have a cushion. Just like Amazon can do whatever the fuck it wants. Why? Because it has Amazon.com as, as a marketplace that makes an ass ton of money now. So they can experiment anywhere they want to. And it doesn't matter if they lose money on it because they have the cushion of the entire retail industry. Samsung doesn't really have a cushion outside of maybe government money from the South Korean government overall. They do make a lot of components that a lot of other manufacturers take advantage of, certainly. But ultimately, they're the company I am a little worried about, and clearly Google is as well, because right now, the way the supply chain and the economy is in general, and inflation and everything else, the business model of buy our shiny new piece of shit as quickly as, quickly and as often as you can, that doesn't work today. And so, which it's not a surprise that Samsung's offering, these really long support cycles for devices. They would have never done that 2-3 years ago. But now they know they have to because they're not going to be able to. There's a few different reasons behind this. I think one of them being that much like Apple's doing, much like everybody's doing, even the Google 6 or the Pixel 6 and the Pixel 7 aren't that different from each other as far as form factor goes. Everything's so iterative. There's no reason not to support them for long periods of time because they're effectively the same fucking hardware. So there's no dramatic differences in code that you need to worry about as far as sending security patches and even OS updates. So there's no reason not to. But Samsung's also got to be feeling the squeeze that, a lot of people probably aren't going to buy the S23 or even the S24 or the S25. As to where 3-4 years ago, people would be upgrading every year. And it's not going to happen now. And I'm glad for that on a personal level, but that's what these companies are really dealing with. So we're entering, so main point to take away here, Pixel devices aren't going anywhere. If you were sweating that, they're not. Okay. But kind of a larger point is business is not being done as usual at all. And I don't just mean there's little changes here and there. I mean, companies are going through dramatic shifts and things are changing. Or are they actually just going in reverse? We'll talk about that when we come back with more Sovryn Tech.
Science, outer space, psychology, book and movie recommendations, fiction from the Sovryn universe, travels to points of mystery and the unexplained, and even spirituality? All of that can only mean one thing. The Sovryn Technica Newsletter! By me, Ellen Sovryn, along with some stuff by that crazy man I call my husband, Dr. Brian Sovryn. It's the latest tool in your self-directed education. The education that really matters. If you want to cut through the crap of mainstream media ass clowns, sign up for the Sovryn Technica newsletter right now at sovryn.substack.com. That's sovryn.substack.com. The Sovryn Technica newsletter. Welcome to the future.
Listener's choice.
So I had an interesting email come in. that had to do with Amazon. That had to do with what I have coined now for many, many years, that being the Amazon World Domination Tour, which was, again, me predicting, in this case, back in 2013, when nobody else was talking about Amazon, me predicting that this is the company that's going to beat out all of the tech giants. Here's all their Trojan horses that they're using, and this is the Amazon World Domination Tour. And you can go all the way back to the early episodes of Sovereign Tech and hear me talk about this, on how they're going to do it. And eventually become a monopsony, which in many ways they have, and really become the tech giant without peer. I mean it. Like, sure, Apple versus Google's going on. Yeah. Amazon doesn't even care. Like, it's not even a battle, you know? It's like God, it's like Greek gods kind of, Hermes and Aphrodite doing bullshit against each other, but Zeus is just above it all. Like, what are you guys doing holding his lightning rod? And, well, if those were actually lightning bolts. But anyway, Amazon's just playing above them all. And I was covering what Amazon was doing long before any other tech show. This Week in Tech, whatever, you take your pick of them. The biggest ones were even bothering to talk about what they're up to. And I was saying, no, you don't get it. This is what everybody's going to be talking about in 5 years. And that's exactly what happened. So my predictive powers still seem to have, I still seem to live somewhat either 6 months to 6 years in the future, as one kind listener said some time ago. But anyway, that's all part of being the future, folks. So I got an email saying, about the Amazon World Domination Tour, basically saying, Stallion, did you realize that Amazon's ad revenue, like their ad business, was bringing in to the tune of $31.6 billion, and that by 2023, the expected net digital ad revenue was projected at $39.45 billion with a B. Did I know about this? And what do I think about it? Okay, so yeah, no, this is something I've known about. And it does play well in what we've talked about recently, how Apple is really pivoting into becoming an ad company more than anything else. I mean, and we did just get the announcement that like there are going to be more ads in the App Store. And like when you're downloading, it's insane what's going on. You have Google, of course, they're going nuts with ads still, where they're even putting ads, they were lengthening like the ads on YouTube to insane lengths. It's getting crazy out there as far as ads go. Now, here's the thing, and we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but there is a large point to bring up. Every company right now wants to be an ad company. They want that ad revenue. They know they need it. Why? Because certainly right now, most people do not have the expendable cash to just keep buying, like we were talking about with Samsung, the new shiny piece of shit. People can't do that right now. But can you show advertisers some, not shiny new piece of shit, but some shiny new numbers that say, oh, you reached this many eyeballs and blah, 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 and what did that do for ROI? And well, you're not going to show them what it did for ROI because it's not going to do anything for ROI. But can you do that? Yes, that is something that you can fudge, and impress somebody that's actually going to give you money, as to where you can't fudge your hardware sales, which is why, of course, for years now, Apple hasn't declared their hardware sales anymore. But if you look at the tech giants, minus Samsung, okay, which, like I said, that's why I think they're in trouble, because they're not in the ad business. But when you look at Microsoft, you look at Meta, you look at Google Alphabet, you look at Amazon, you look at Apple, what Apple's planning on, even if they're not bringing in crazy ad revenue right now, they are hiring loaded for bear on this one to become an ad company. Okay. You can see like just how much each company is putting into this side of their business. It's the same reason Microsoft will never give up on Bing, because they know they need that ad revenue. I mean, they're pretty much putting ads in all their widgets in Windows 11 anyway, right? And the numbers that you're seeing for the ad revenue from these companies are astronomical. You know, I mean, maybe not everybody's performing as well as Amazon is right now, but I mean, it's another area where they're a sleeping giant compared to Google. It's just a matter of time. But I mean, they're probably making more money on ad revenue than they are in just about anything else, minus maybe AWS. Now, I think what's happening here is all of these ad dollars, these increased ad dollars, be it projected or real right now in hand, is cutting into Google's business. You know, Google for the past, almost 20 years has been blowing away any other company on ad revenue, just blowing them away. But I think Google sees that that's changing, and that Amazon's cutting in. Apple's definitely going to cut in just on their, just on their reach of the Apple ecosystem alone. And they're scared. And that's part of why they're getting into the hardware business, because they need another, they have the cushion of their ad revenue right now, but they need to get into the hardware business. So, they need to pivot a bit, because ads are not going to bring in the amount of money that they need to. That's part of the reason. I mean, why would they drop like their Area 120, experimental projects by 50%? Because they can't afford it. Straight up. They just can't afford it right now. And they need to do something. They need to bring in some kind of new proven business model, which hardware certainly is. Again, look at Apple. That can supplement their declining ad revenue. So ultimately, again, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but this is a point I want to bring up. Ultimately, what's happening here is Silicon Valley is effectively becoming an ad industry. And ultimately, that makes me feel like, like all of this promise that Silicon Valley had that, we're going to change the world. We're going to bring knowledge to the world. We're going to do all this. We're going to set information free. We're going to set entertainment free. We're going to, democratize creativity. We're going to do all this crap. We're going to, we're going to change everything. We're going to get rid of the gatekeepers. We're going to do blah, 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 blah. All of that now in 2022 is effectively proven to be excrement. Complete bullshit. If any, look, this is, you got to understand, like, what was television, which was the previous, before the PC, okay, you had the PC revolution, right? What was the revolution before the PC? You had the television revolution. Before that, you had the radio revolution. Okay, television really was a revolution, and arguably had very similar aims to what Silicon Valley would talk about, we're going to get information out there. We're going to get this, we're going to get that, blah, blah, blah. That was the conversations that were happening. And you can look at the regulation around television where you had to have such and so much educational content, or G.I. Joe has to have a moral message at the end, or whatever, this is stuff that was claimed to be required. But ultimately, what did television become? Regardless of if we get, an amazing show like Cosmos or Star Trek, or, the handful of shows that actually stand the test of time, and that actually improve, I would argue, the human condition. Ultimately, what did the television revolution become? It became an ad industry. That's all it was. How to sell a Toyota. That's all it became. And what's happening with Silicon Valley? The same fucking thing. So, while certainly we now live in a surveillance civilization, in fact, I don't even like the term, fuck surveillance capitalism, fuck the concept of surveillance society, or the surveillance state, or anything like that. Now that smartphones really, again, are infrastructure, they're not an option. They are ultimately, yes, but to get around in civilization as it stands today, largely you have to have a smartphone. Okay. Again, when you can't even see the menu at a restaurant anymore without a smartphone, we're in trouble. But that's where we're at. And so, in that sense, it is really, society is not a strong enough word, because society is like, okay, well, sure, people have accepted it. But when it's civilization, that means it's infrastructure. That means it's like the pipes, right? It's like plumbing. So surveillance at this point is like plumbing, and that's a major part of what, the new ad industry is about. But while it is a new way of schlepping ads to you, the world really hasn't changed. Nothing changed. This whole PC revolution, this whole, like the internet setting everything free and whatever, and information, being cheap and easy and blah, blah. Nothing changed. Nothing has changed. These companies that had these supposed lofty goals, including Apple, mind you, who was the biggest one. Remember what Steve Jobs said? People turn on their television and they turn their brain off. They turn on their computer to turn their brain on. Remember that? Great quote. Great quote. Great idea. I agree. I thought that's how things were going to be. But even Apple is really just, what is that? New boss, same as the old boss. We haven't changed anything. Nothing's changed. The internet has not changed shit, because everything is just advertising still. Nothing changed. If anything, it's worse, because at least in the old ad industry, creators got to make a pretty penny. They got to make a nice chunk of change. But now creators make practically nothing. I mean, how many YouTube stars, how many stories do you have to read about like YouTube or Twitch stars who, have 1 million subscribers or whatever else, and they work as a waiter or waitress for a day job because they don't make enough, but they're one of the most popular people on the planet. Creatives are fucked now, especially with, varying IP laws and DMCA, like all kinds. I mean, it's just screwing everybody. So if anything, the internet has made everything fucking worse, and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. I'm glad. Okay, you can say that you and like me, that, all right, great, we were able to download, free movies and free books and all of this jazz and everything. And yeah, you know what? That's dynamite. But we are such a we're not even like a 0.1 percentile of the population that knows to take advantage of this stuff and knows how to even do that or even cares. We are such a small part of the population. Nothing has changed, and everything around us has just gotten worse. Because why? Because what became the ultimate aims of these companies? Advertising, which is what has been the monetary backbone of every technology for the past 150 years. Nothing has changed. Stop putting the bullshit message out there that the internet set things free, or that, oh, isn't it amazing that we can access all this from our smartphone, or blah, blah, blah. Stop. It's only made it all worse. Nothing has changed. These companies, all they're interested in, you say, oh yeah, well, they've empowered me as a creator or whatever. Well, you can't make anywhere near as much as a creator did, 20 years ago, or hell, even 10 years ago. But not only that, why are they empowering you as a creator? To sell more ads, and that's all. They don't give a shit about art. Not for a goddamn thing. And art is an essential part of the human condition. And when your entire civilization is effectively based on something that really, and I would argue that ads and the profit motive, they're really kissing cousins, if not more than kissing cousins. When that's the underpinning of all technology and, everything around you, like that is effectively anti-art. And it becomes ultimately anti-human. Now, am I arguing for, some kind of primitivism or something like that? No, I'm not saying that at all. Okay. But what I am saying to you is stop pretending. Stop pretending that the world has changed, that somehow, that any part of Silicon Valley, I don't care, that any part of Silicon Valley has somehow improved the world or changed things. They haven't. They've gone back to the quote-unquote tried and true. They've gone back to what's, put forward any technology. I mean, fuck, even Netflix has to put ads in their paid. I mean, that's the same thing that happened to cable, right? Cable originally, the idea was, no, you were paying for television, so you don't need to get ads. But then what happened? Holy fuck, suddenly there's commercials on CNN, or there's commercials on whatever, on TBS or TBN or whatever, whatever network, TNT. What happened? You got screwed over. It's because nothing changes. All of these technological advancements, nothing fucking changes. It just keeps going back to the old ways. It keeps going back to advertising. And so I say to you, welcome to the old world, brought to you by Silicon Valley. I'll be back with more Sovereign Tech. Hey, baby, I know. You are tired of Gmail. You have had enough. Well, I have a solution for you. What I want you to do is you go to Fastmail, okay? It's fastmail.sovereigntech.com. That's the URL you can use. You're going to get a discount with that. You are going to love this. This is email for email's sake. This company does nothing more. Just email, and they do it right. All the latest security technologies. You want to log into your account with your YubiKey? You can do that. Fastmail has your hookup. Very inexpensive plans. I want you to check it out. You go to fastmail.sovereigntech.com. That'll get you the hookup, and it's an honor to have them as a part of Sovereign Tech. Woo! Let's get back to the show.
Shall we play a game?
Woo! All right. We get to calm down a little bit and relax. And actually, I've got great shit to talk about now. Back when there was some innovation coming out of Silicon Valley, or at least the PC revolution hadn't been taken over by ads yet. Tim Draper hadn't figured out how to get those ads in the bottom of Hotmail. No, actually, by this time he would have. And what time are we talking about? We are talking about none other than the glory year of 1996. Though for many others, it might have been 1997 when this would end up on PlayStation as compared to 96 when it would end up on PC. And we are talking about a remastered version. It's not done yet, though there is a full-on standalone demo that you can download. Link is in the show notes for this. Believe me, you're going to want to, because we are talking about one of the greatest games in history, PC or console. And certainly on console, I actually, kind of an interesting thing. We'll talk about it. We'll break it down. I've covered this before, because for me, it was right up there with Star Wars TIE Fighter as one of the most influential, not just games, but really pieces of media in my life ever. In fact, this game, which despite what others, may think, and certainly people have had plenty of theories of why does, and this is still true, folks, for those that have seen me, why does the Man of Tomorrow always wear all black all the time? I mean, holy shit, even my wedding ring's black. It's insane. Why? Why does he wear all black? Well, reason being is this game right here. Wing Commander 4, The Price of Freedom. And you're wondering, wait a minute. So then why does he wear all black? Look, I've already told the story a ton of times. There's this secret organization, and they're not the good guys, which that shouldn't surprise you that I was into the bad guys in the game. There's a secret organization called Black Lance that's what they do. They wear all black all the time. And I thought they were so fucking badass. And that's actually what inspired me. At the time, I would have been 15, 16. And that's where it all started. Anyway, very influential game. Great storyline. Of course, you have multiple storyline paths to go through because this is Wing Commander, of course, is a flight sim. Probably next to Star Wars, maybe, and say Free Space or a couple others, maybe the most popular flight sim, certainly space flight sim series in history. It's still always talked about, and as is happening here, it's actually getting a fan remastering. This is incredibly exciting. But Wing Commander, I mean, like, most people did PC gaming just so they could jump on this action. Granted, these games would appear, all of the Wing Commander games, or at least quite a few of them, would appear on other consoles. Like on Super Nintendo, like the first Wing, or Secret Missions anyway, would be on there. Lots of different consoles would try to take it on because, again, it just was that fucking popular. Even when the last game of the series, it wasn't really numbered, but it was kind of Wing Commander 5. Anyway, Wing Commander Prophecy, the farthest game in the storyline, when that got released, that would even get a Game Boy Advance port of all things. I mean, that's how popular these games were. But Wing Commander 3 and Wing Commander 4 would both get a release on the PlayStation 1. And a lot of people, that was the way they got introduced to it, because they were also full motion video games. So as much as they were spaceflight sims, they were also, again, FMV, and starring none other than Mark Hamill as the Heart of the Tiger. He was just fantastic in it. And he had lots of great actors. You had Malcolm McDowell, John Rhys-Davies. I mean, they were just loaded. And really, for me, Wing Commander 4 was the height. Even though Prophecy was a technically more advanced game, Wing Commander 4, I still think is as good as it gets. Just like, sure, with TIE Fighter, we would get, X-Wing Alliance that would come out later on and would technically be more impressive. I still think TIE Fighter is the greater game. The irony is, Wing Commander 4 was kind of the least best-selling game of the entire saga, and that's part of the reason. So this is getting done basically by a group of fans, not unlike the TIE Fighter Total Conversion that came out a couple of years ago now, where they completely redid and rebuilt and added missions and all this stuff into the original, or as part of the original Star Wars TIE Fighter. Of course, interestingly, they would use the X-Wing Alliance engine for it, but you get my point. Similar thing is being done here with Wing Commander 4 Remastered, where they are, they're upscaling the full motion video to like 4K, which that's not hard, because most 4K content is upscaled anyway. It's not natively 4K. Anyway, don't need to go back down that road. And then for the game's, graphics and everything, like they're changing up the missions, making things, trying to make improvements here and there in what you can do in the missions. And I applaud everything that they're trying to do. They're remastering the score, the soundtrack. I mean, they're doing really great work here. Link is in the show notes, but it's WCREspace.com. That's where you can go to download the demo. You can play it right now, and it's fucking insane. Like, just how good this looks. The only thing I really can compare it to is TIE Fighter Total Conversion. And frankly, TIE Fighter Total Conversion, in my opinion, is the singular reason to have a gaming PC. Like, because it's that goddamn great. And they just had a recent patch come out, version 1.3.2. So they're not resting on this. As far as when Wing Commander 4 Remastered is going to be done, the team admits, hey, look, we're just fans. We have day jobs. It'll be done when it's done. But man, if it takes 5 years, but we get results like we did with TIE Fighter Total Conversion, we're in for a winner here. I mean, really. Just a phenomenal. I mean, this game... Especially if one of my problems with the Wing Commander series as compared to the Star Wars flight sims was the motion, like the sense of motion in the games never really clicked for me. And it really is exclusive to Wing Commander, and it's some kind of development. I don't want to say a technical issue. It's just some kind of way that they were developed, because I can think of other flight sim series, like say, including on the PlayStation, like the phenomenal Colony Wars trilogy. And I have no problem with the sense of flight, like that I am moving at speeds, within that game. Same is true for, the Star Wars space sims. But with Wing Commander, I used to describe it, it felt like I was kind of flying a couch or like flying a desk. It was very weird. It didn't feel like the fighter was moving. It felt more like everything else was kind of moving around you. It didn't work right. But the demo that I checked out, like, that problem is solved. So, what could be argued as, in my mind, the last issue of the Wing Commander series, which really wasn't an issue because the stories are so great. like you want to play them anyway. You can even watch them like a movie if you want. In fact, I've even featured them in the Sovryn Technica newsletter to watch them as a movie. But the stories are so great, like that was, the flight sim part of it was never really an issue for me, but they're even looking to improve on that. And so far what I've seen, they have. So this is instant download, definitely something you want to support in any way that you can. I'm super stoked for this. They said that the reason they chose Wing Commander 4 particularly was that if EA was ever going to do their own remastering, they would do it for the original trilogy, which sold gangbusters, 1, 2, and 3. And they said that for Prophecy, there's already a massive modding scene that, there wasn't any point. So they went for the thing that probably was the jewel that wasn't going to get uncovered. And I applaud them for that. But it just so happens also to be my favorite game in the entire saga. Again, the storyline, you'll love it. And especially you get the option to take some darker turns in this. And big fan. Big fan. When Mark Hamill as Admiral Blair, if you don't know about this ending, you want to check that out. With Mark Hamill as Admiral Blair, standing on the bridge. Oh man, that's so good. Anyway, those that know. So yeah, check this out. Link is in the show notes, and we'll certainly be keeping an eye on this one. And when it does fully release, I will definitely be doing a review. Actually, I imagine Rob and I might even do a review of on all things TIE Fighter Renegades, when that time comes. So we'll be right back with some more Sovryn Tech and maybe some more fun.
Journey into the far reaches of aquaspace.
Attention, security breach.
Brace for impact. Seal outer doors. Rig for collision.
Launch countermeasures.
From Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment Inc. and Universal Television comes a journey into the future and beneath the sea. Roy Scheider stars in Sequest DSV.
You can watch Sequest by downloading it from your favorite torrent site or getting it on glorious DVD. For beneath the surface lies the future.
Come on!
Album of the Week.
Oh man, what you have got right here for Album of the Week is certainly in the top 10 albums of 2022. And that's saying something, because we've had some doozies in 2022. This is certainly a top 10 album. It's not going to be Album of the Year. It's not going to beat Victorious's, Dinosaur Warfare Part 2. Like, nothing's touching that. But this is getting mighty close. This was an album that I've been incredibly excited for all year because we knew it was coming. Frontiers, who I've talked about in previous albums of the week, Frontiers Music SRL has promoted the fuck out of this thing. And boy, am I glad, because they deserve it. Because they've got, here's the thing. Frontiers normally lives off of the largesse of name recognition, where they'll combine, say, Stryper's Michael Sweet with George Lynch, from Dokken and Lynch Mob, which is an insane combination to make in many ways, but then you get two great albums out of it, right? Frontiers, they generally, and I'm not complaining, I love the fact that they give older acts, a new platform, as it were. Rarely, well, not too rare, but yeah, all right, I'm going to say rarely. Rarely does Frontiers really make a name for themselves by bringing up a new artist. They do it all the time. And there are some really phenomenal acts that have come out of Frontiers. But they don't really, I've never really seen where anyone else has gotten this kind of a push. But this gal has gotten that kind of a push. Hard. And I'm probably not pronouncing, I keep forgetting how to pronounce her first name, but Chez Kane. Okay. She was originally in a band called Kane, I think with her sister or whatever. Great albums. You can check those out as well. But she had initially had an album, a self-titled album, come out in 2021, which was just shy of Album of the Year that year as well. And I mean, just phenomenal songs on it. Better Than Love, all of it, Rocket on the Radio, Too Late for Love. I mean, there's just tons of killer songs on there. Her new album, now, all right, hold on. Now I want to talk about her previous album for a second, okay? So far, I mean, and I've gone through her second album, which is called Powerzone, and that's our album of the week, okay, coming out in 2022. Her new album, I don't think there is as many catchy songs on it. It's still great, but here's where the new album I think is actually better. So her first album, I felt like, and this is true for a lot of bands or, you know, artists coming out of Europe, which Chez Kane is one of those. They are writing songs that sound very much like rock hits, you know, or metal hits from the 70s and 80s, but like they're changing them up just enough to where it sounds kind of fresh and it's kind of different. Here's an example. The band Nestor, okay? Phenomenal launch album. I mean, just a phenomenal debut album, really. Like, holy shit. And that's a self-titled album as well. They have the song on there, Perfect 10. Okay? Kick-ass song. Here's the thing. Listen to the backbeat on that. It's Kiss. You know? It's I Was Made for Loving You. That's exactly what it is. I mean, the rolling drum beat, everything about it is I Was Made for Loving You. The song after Perfect 10 on that same album is Right Now by Van Halen. Even though it's not Right Now by Van Halen, it's another song. But you can hear the din, din, din. You can hear all that. And this is becoming a very common thing. I even noticed it with like those big 9 albums that Psycho Sinner put out a year or so ago, where there was the one song that sounded, what was it, Fucking in Hell or whatever, that sounded exactly, intonation, everything's the same. It's War Machine by Kiss from Creatures of the Night, which I can't wait for that remastered version to come out in November of Creatures of the Night. Anyway, so this is a thing that's happening. I'm not really complaining about it. I like it. Bring that sound back. Get people back into that sound, and then hopefully they'll explore the previous catalog of metal, you know, or, you know, in hard rock, and we'll see. But so this is the thing, like, so I feel like with Chez Kane's first album, especially with like the song All of It, is very much just like I Want It All by Queen. It has the same like attitude. And there's other songs that kind of hit in that range where it's like, oh, you're sort of playing with a classic, but you're trying to make it your own and make it a different song. But like, if you're someone like me who has the memory that I have and also the, you know, experiences, and has listened to so much goddamn music in one's life that you can't help but hear it. So Powerzone, her new album, however, I don't feel like there was really any song on here that pulled that trick where it was meant to sound like a previous classic from another band. So I'm going to give it credit for that. And there are great songs on here. Opening track, I Just Want You, phenomenal. The Things We Do When We're Young in Love, phenomenal. Children of Tomorrow Gone, Powerzone. I mean, it's still a great album. There's some of the slower stuff I felt like was a little weak, but even what's a weaker song is hitting the attitude of the era, because she's playing straight up 80s hard rock here. It's hitting the attitude of that era, and so I love it, just because it sounds like it came from that time, and that's great. Admittedly, like a lot of what I think gives so much power to Chez Kane's sound is that her producer is none other than Danny Rexon. Danny Rexon, of course, is the brains and lead singer for Crazy Licks, which is easily one of the best modern rock acts in the world. Like their album that came out in 2022, Rise Above, just amazing. Or sorry, that was 2021. Street Lethal was the name of the album for Crazy Licks, but the kind of the title or the opening track is Rise Above, and man, just pure fucking nuclear intensity. Anyway, check out Powerzone by Chez Kane, and by all means, and let nothing take anything, don't let anything detract from her first album. Go and listen to that first album too if you haven't already. These are two of the best albums really in the past 20 years, 30 years, for fuck's sake. I mean, they're really, really solid. I think she definitely deserves to be put in that category, with like Lee Aaron, Chrissy Steele, and those kinds of acts. I mean, she's delivering right there. So anyway, Chez Kane with Powerzone from this year, 2022, just came out in October. Check it out, and we'll be back with more Sovryn Tech.
From Big Finish Productions, Blake 7, The Classic Audio Adventures.
I'm taking Liberator in on manual. We'll be in teleport range in 2 minutes.
What the hell was that?
Information. Liberator has been attacked.
You don't say.
Put up the force wall.
Confirmed.
Message to all ground commanders. Initiate the final phase. Let's crush these rebels once and for all.
My name is Avon. Kerr Avon.
Kerr Avon.
Our hostage arrives, but you may be unnecessary.
As a hostage, it's nice to be superfluous.
You can go to Blake7.com to find more of the new adventures of one of science fiction's greatest masterpieces, Blake 7, at Blake7.com.
The Ancient and the Strange.
It is time for The Ancient and the Strange, and we are going to continue on our journey, audio journey, of reading some of the spirituality segments from the Sovryn Technica newsletter. Of course, you can sign up for that at sovryn.substack.com, and even in the free version, you get the spirituality segment. So even if you just want to do the free version, go for it. If you want to pay for it, I know that Ellen certainly would be honored, and of course, as would I. This one is, well, so you're going to hear me in the opening of it mention the naturism conversation. That is something I am not going to do for The Ancient and the Strange. Not going to get, or at least not anytime soon. That is a series within the Sovryn Technica newsletter that is going to be pretty much stuck to that. Maybe in the future when it's done and done, I would do an audio version of it, but for now, it's going to stick into the newsletter. So this was a quick break, as I call it, from the naturism conversation. And it's titled, You Are Not Meant for Mundanity. And believe it or not, it is a write-up about a video game commercial. And you may be asking, what the fuck does that have to do with spirituality? Well, amazingly, as you'll find out, in my opinion, everything. It is one of the singular, most brilliant advertising campaigns, even on face value. It was genius, and it's for Sony it's for the PlayStation, for the PlayStation in general, not just any one game, but it was for the PlayStation. I will play that audio. I'll break while I'm reading, because there's a point where I say, here, I want you to stop reading this, watch this video, and then come back and read this. I will play the audio for you right here. And I'm more than happy to, because I think, it's a fucking life mantra. It's so great. And not terribly long, but it is so goddamn great. And I'll probably cut it off before it says the words PlayStation, but you'll get everything that matters in the audio. So I don't know that I can really explain what I want to say other than in what I actually wrote. So I'm not going to spend a bunch of time here, but I think you'll get the point as I read it, and then I'll come back with more, and then we got to get into our Black Adam review. Oh yeah, baby. So I'll see you on the other side of this segment. You are not meant for mundanity. I want to take a quick break from the very important naturism conversation this issue to answer a question I often get ever since I started more openly discussing the mystical, spiritual, and esoteric. Dr. Sovryn, this spirituality/Kabbalah is great and all, but what does this all end up looking like in practice? Where does this go? Well, without getting into the notion of repairing the universe just yet, I have a video I want you to watch. It's not long, I won't waste your time, and yes, it's a video game commercial, but I want you to trust me and listen to the words very carefully.
Who are you not to be great? You, with the imagination of a brilliant child and the powers of an ancient god. Who are you to be ordinary? You, who can rescind life or raise the dead. Who are you to be afraid? You, who can serve as judge and jury while hoarding infinite lives. Who are you to be a slave to the past? You, who can travel time like the oceans and rewrite history with a single word. Who are you to be anonymous? You, whose name should be spoken in reverent tones or in terrified whispers. Who are you to deny greatness? If you would deny to yourself, you deny to the entire world. And we will not be denied.
Amazing. And really, the opening words are enough. Who are you not to be great? You with the imagination of a brilliant child and the powers of an ancient god? Those are ridiculously powerful and, depending on one's effort, potentially true words that have no right to be in, of all things, a Sony PlayStation console advertisement. But there it is. It's perhaps fitting, and not so coincidental, that I wrote about this ad, which I have talked about on Sovryn Tech many times, as I am modding a PlayStation 3 console. While the history of this commercial from 2013 is legendary, and the entire Greatness Awaits campaign by Sony would, rightfully, go on for years, I don't think it's fully appreciated for what it says and visually delivers. Sure, it's exciting, and it probably helped sell a whole hell of a lot of PlayStation 4s and Vitas, which, frankly, everyone should own a modded Vita. It's the last game console you'll ever need, trust me. But there is a lot more going on here than just slick production. If you don't mind me dalliancing in the mystical for a moment, nearly every word spoken by the charismatic narrator has a ring of truth to it when one considers the spiritual realm and powers that exist there too. Yes, perhaps even the travel time like the oceans bit. Even the comment of rewriting history with a single word highlights the importance of words and language and their effect on space-time and thought. We'll get to that thought part in the future. Every line of the commercial could have entire books written about it. In fact, it's almost odd. Nearly everything said, besides perhaps the comment about hoarding infinite lives, isn't really applicable to video games, and is spoken of so broadly as if it were an ancient Egyptian mantra right out of the Book of the Dead, which should actually be called the Book of the Ever-Living, but that's another conversation, and no Mumra jokes, please. But it gets even better. The very end, when our lead character says, "We will not be denied," suddenly the chaos of the reality he exists within becomes clear, and I can't help but see that chaos he enters as a visual representation of the spiritual realm that we, unless trained to do so, normally don't see, but is always there, right down to the demons. This is a masterpiece of mysticism, my friends, and the person who devised it knows a lot more about how the universe actually works than most scientists, I think. The beauty here, though, is that this doesn't even have to be about mysticism. The call to action from the very beginning of it can be integrated right now in a very simple level 1 way. Who are you not to be great? That simple line is rhetorical, and I think it beautifully conveys the idea that all people have the capability of greatness, regardless of whatever limitations life has dealt you. As stewards, this is the kind of rhetoric we should be confronting children with every day. Not asking them what they want to be when they grow up, or any of these other questions that can't possibly have proper answers for decades at least, but instead instilling in them that they have every tool they need within themselves to be absolutely fucking extraordinary, and yes, greatness is not a zero-sum game. We can all be great, because there's infinite ways of expressing greatness, and there's plenty of universe to go around last time I pulled out the telescope. Now that I write this, adults need this kind of rhetorical questions asked of themselves too. Wake up every day saying to yourself, who am I not to be great? And as the narrator said, if you deny greatness to yourself, you deny it to the entire world. What a pity if Mozart, Einstein, or Tony Hawk, I'm serious, denied the world of their brilliance that launched the entire species into another level of existence with their music, their words and theories, and their acts of extreme physical ingenuity. So here's the deal. I dare you to defy the ordinary. Because who are you not to be great? And there you have it from issue 8 of the Sovryn Technica newsletter. Really, I mean, such powerful stuff. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I have listened, even just listened. I mean, watching it, and link is in the show notes if you want to watch the video of it as well. Even just watching it as well. Like, there's so much more that's going on that I kind of like described that happens at the end. It's amazing. It's just that I know I keep saying that, but it's all I can say about it. And there is so much, like, everything could just be picked apart. And like I said, entire books could be written about that. And I think that the subjects described, I know you're thinking it's just video games. Yeah, but open your mind a little bit more. Okay, just listen. Well, I'm not saying your mind is closed. I'm just saying stretch it out a little bit more. And I think you'll find that in a lot of what was said in that simple video game commercial is a lot of what our ancestors were trying to tell us for perhaps thousands of years. And of course, that's a major subject of what we'll be getting into in The Ancient and the Strange. So I will leave this segment at that. But we've got, like I said, time for the spoiler filled. So turn it off if you haven't seen it yet, or if you have a problem with spoilers, which you shouldn't because you're not a terrorist and you don't need to hold people's tongues hostage just because they're excited about something. For fuck's sake, grow up. I'll be right back with the Black Adam review. Woo!
The most incredible television event ever, as you join the crew of Battlestar Galactica.
Right here, you creepy crawly. I have led the entire human race to ruin.
The last of mankind, fighting for life in a hostile galaxy.
Most of us are dead.
Alone, with only one hope, Battlestar Galactica and her crew.
There is no other destination.
Commander Adama, Captain Apollo, the intrepid Starbuck, and the dazzling Athena, searching for a new and peaceful world.
May as well live for today. We might not have many left. Let the attack begin.
A new age of high adventure, Battlestar Galactica.
The Golden Stallion doing whatever he wants to do. The Climax.
It is time for the Climax, and I have to tell you that, now, I did kind of like a pre-review of Black Adam, the 2022 Dwayne Johnson, The Rock vehicle. I did a pre-review on for the Wednesday Q&A this past week for Sovryn Tech patrons. I got a little heated up on that because, man, do I get so goddamn frustrated with the MCU, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't get frustrated necessarily with Marvel, though there are certainly things to get frustrated there, as far as like Marvel Comics proper. But the MCU, I can't do it. Anyway, I can do DC movies. I can handle that. And I think we're off to a great start here. So this movie, which of course was delayed a couple times, there's a pretty storied history around its production. And originally, actually, The Rock was being offered to play either Captain Marvel, which I think would have been a very daring choice, or Black Adam. And Black Adam was originally supposed to be in like the first Shazam movie. Now, I'm not going to give the very confusing history of the Marvel family, not Marvel Comics, the Marvel family, Fawcett Comics, later getting owned by DC, now officially named Shazam, which is fine because since I was a kid, we were always calling Billy Batson in Captain Marvel. We were calling him Shazam anyway. It does get a little confusing with Mary Marvel, but now even her they call Lady Shazam, which fine. But one of my favorite characters in comic book history. And admittedly, Black Adam is one of those as well. Anyway, so originally, The Rock could have been Shazam. Or he could have been Black Adam, and Black Adam could have been in the first Shazam film. I think it's fine that he wasn't. The first Shazam movie is very well done for what it is. And this is somewhat of a sequel to it, even though this movie really stands very well on its own. Even if you've never seen another DC Comics or a recent DC Comics movie like some of the phenomenal, and I say that without irony, the phenomenal Zack Snyder films, and they're fucking great. It's not my fault other people don't know how to make comic book movies that pay fidelity to the actual comic books, which Marvel doesn't do. Anyway, this is the point I got to on Patreon. And this is an overall point for this film. Because when you go to see this, if you are expecting a Marvel movie, you are not going to get a Marvel movie. Okay? You are going to get a genuine translation of, or should I say transition? No, not translation. Yeah. A translation with fidelity of a comic book ripped off of the pages and put onto celluloid. Of course, no, all movies are digital today, but you get my point. Onto film. That's what you get here. This is the most important thing to understand about this movie. This movie is made like comic books are written. Marvel movies are made like movies are written, and that's part of the problem. Not even how good movies are written. Okay? This is lifted straight off of a page of a comic book. It feels like a comic book. You get a lot of characters in this. You get the Justice Society of America. Of course, they don't put in the of America part. Why? Because China. You got to make money in China. You got to put this movie in China. And we want that Justice Society to be global, baby. In fact, there's even a weird comment from Hawkman in this. Would you even know that it was Hawkman if you didn't know anything about the comic books? No, but that's okay, because when comic book characters originally get introduced into comic books themselves, not movies, into comic books, they just say their name, hey, how you doing? And, glad I could save you from the bad guy or whatever and help you out, and now let's go finish the job. I'm your new partner. And it feels very much like that, and that's fine, because that's how comic books have been written for almost 100 years. That's okay. Anyway, Hawkman strangely says that the Justice Society's mission is to preserve global stability, not peace, not any other, not truth and justice and whatever, in the American way or anything. I mean, of course, that's Superman, but not anything like that. But he says global stability. Boy, if that isn't like a touch of predictive programming, I don't know. I mean, I just admit it. It's there. Like, it's a weird comment for him to make. I totally get and understand the marketing reasons of why they're not calling it the Justice Society of America. And let's be clear here. In the comic books, they are still called the Justice Society of America. In the proper comic books. There was a 4-issue series that were introductions to all members of the Justice Society within the continuity of the Black Adam film. That's very different than the actual DC Comics continuity of the actual fucking comics. In that, it's still the JSA. So anyway, and I'm a big fan of the Justice Society. Admittedly, I like the Justice Society a lot more than I like the Justice League. Just because the Justice Society always had like a bit more crass characters. And I think the characters overall were actually better. You would get Shazam, you get Black Adam, you get Power Girl, one of the best characters, in comic history. You get like Alan Scott, like, the old kick-ass Green Lantern and all that. I mean, it was always a really cool collection of like, old, Young Lion meets, new Old Lion. And I really always liked that about the JSA. But anyway. So, and of course, Hawkman. And Dr. Fate, who's also one of the top characters. And Pierce Brosnan plays Dr. Fate in this and does a phenomenal job, by the way. He's wearing a motion capture suit the whole time, and you can really tell. But I'm not that worried about the effects, even though the effects overall are great. I mean, they are second to none in the world today. But just admitting, you can certainly tell that that's not Pierce Brosnan walking around looking that damn good, in a suit, even when he has the helmet off. But they did a great job with Dr. Fate. They really, really did in this film. Anyway, continuing on. So, I mean, I could talk about this forever because the Marvel family, or the Shazam family, if we want to call that now, and Black Adam and all that. I mean, these are characters that I've been fans of, particularly more Black Adam than Shazam, because I've never been a huge fan of the concept of Billy Batson. I get it. I understand why it's popular. and I don't mind that it exists. I've just never like, I like Shazam because between him and like Mon-El, they're as powerful, or at times, if not more so, than Superman, right? And particularly with Shazam, whose powers are magic based, Superman can't stand up to him because none of his powers are effective against magic. That's always been a weakness for Superman. So I've always had this real respect for characters that are considered more powerful than Superman, right? Because Superman in comic book history is generally considered the most powerful within DC's continuity. Of course, there's many times where characters would evolve beyond, Superman's abilities, like say the Flash and some other, like Wally West, particularly, and others. But anyway, I always dig those kinds of characters, even though I'm a huge fan of Superman, and Batman and Wonder Woman and all, all the biggies. Anyway, so where was I with this movie? Yeah, you get the Justice Society. If you don't know them, like, you get barely any explanation of who they are. Again, that's how comic books are written. That's fine. I'm sorry that doesn't appeal to people's movie sensibilities, but I don't care, because when I go to see a comic book movie, what I really want to see is a comic book in movie format. I don't want to see a great movie in movie format. Does that make sense? And that's what you're getting here with Black Adam. Now, I don't know who was behind that logic, and who decided that that's how, we want to do things. Not that this is the first time. I actually have to give credit to Marvel for I'm not going to say they were the first ones to pull this off, but they were the first ones to pull it off on a very large scale in theaters. Marvel, if you remember, with Ang Lee's Incredible Hulk movie that came out in theaters before Disney owned Marvel, an excellent, excellent film. Frankly, better than Edward Norton's, what he came out with. But if you remember that was played up like visually, where they even showed you going from comic strip to comic strip, from like panel to panel. I really wish Black Adam could have gotten away with that, and I would have loved it if they did, because then it would have been the visual cues of, this is how you understand the movie. It is an actual fucking comic book put to movies. Okay. Anyway, so, Marvel did this first. If anybody's going to complain about DC saying, oh, well, DC sucks, I can't believe they did this. Well, no, Marvel did this way before, years before, and I want to give them credit for that. O ye Marvel faithful. Anyway, this, and again, I think this movie ultimately wins for that. Also, even though it doesn't have what would be Zack Snyder's, I would say, his dark signature style, credit to where it's due that, and I don't even know how to pronounce the director's name. I feel terrible about that. But the director, Yame Kolitsera, probably got that wrong. I'm just going to say Sarah. And the writers, of course, Rory Haynes and Adam Zitkiel, they got it. They understood that they are writing a god, when they're writing Black Adam. And the movie really put that on display. Like, there's an opening sequence. Now, clearly The Rock had plenty of influence on this movie. Because his signature style of having like weird 70s or even 80s, like popular tracks playing kind of out of nowhere and sort of out of place. And they do sort of feel out of place in this, or even 60s songs. Like that happens in this. It's fine. It works overall. I'm not going to complain. And especially when it's the Rolling Stones. Okay, I'm there. But like when Black Adam first appears and he's getting attacked by the villains, the real villains, that being Intergang, it's playing Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones, and he's moving. Of course, Black Adam can move faster than any human, and it looks like he's moving in slow motion compared to what all the humans are doing. Really, they're the ones moving in slow motion. He's moving in normal time, or normal time for Black Adam. And you're getting the sense right there that this is somebody who just doesn't think on the human level. You are dealing with a god. And this is so well done and very Zack Snyder-ish without it going so far as being Zack Snyder. But I feel like respect was paid to the guy who got us to this point where, like DC Comics could be treated with some seriousness. And I do give Zack Snyder that credit. Also, again, spoilers ahoy here, folks. Like, I'm not going to hold back. Amazingly, in the end credit sequence, which you better sit around for, and there's only one, we get Henry Cavill back as Superman, baby. Man of Steel. Woo! I mean that. Fucking awesome. And he looked great. And, you look like you're going to get that face-off between Black Adam and Superman, and I can't wait for that movie. And I mean that. Anyway, so there's a lot, there's so much well done with the cinematography in this movie that really parlays you are dealing with creatures, or at least with Black Adam, with something that is just existing on another level. And I really, really love that in this movie. That's always been DC Comics' strength since the late 80s anyway, where they really, they always take a moment to treat these superheroes and villains, like the Greek gods, the parallelism of Greek gods that they are. Marvel has never really been able to pull that off, other than maybe with like Earth X. Marvel's never really been able to pull that off, but it's because Marvel Comics in general are more immature. But the maturity of DC Comics, really comes through, even though, again, I could have done without Paint It Black playing during that moment. Some more epic music would have been fine, some Hans Zimmer in there, but that's okay. Whatever, it worked. The acting, so just to break this one down, by the components, the acting, I think, on all fronts was fantastic. I think everybody did either, if depending upon the bit part that they had, I thought everybody's acting was on point. The script, I thought, was very well done. The one surprising part was just how fucking funny this was without using the Marvel humor formula. Ellen and I saw this. She was laughing her ass off through much of the film. It's that funny. And I don't think anybody expected it to be that funny. And The Rock's kind of deadpan delivery on some things really worked. He's definitely channeling some inner Christopher Judge, like Teal'c, from SG-1. He was really, really working that line, working that angle really well, I should say. The problem, though, and this is true unfortunately, for many comic book movie, Marvel or otherwise, the villain is just an obstacle in the way. You don't really get the motivation. You don't really get the understanding of the villain. You don't get any of that. My only hope is that, I hate to use that word, but my only hope is that they set up Black Adam to properly take on, say, Superman or other characters of that ilk. And in taking them on, we have a character or an opposition, whether it's you want to consider them the villain or not, that's a matter of perspective, I suppose. But the opposition is a character that you understand and you know their motivations. And so that makes the battle that much more epic, or that makes the conflict between the two characters that much more epic. So I'm hoping for that. It kind of sucked that they basically had a stepping stone villain in this one, even though it's effectively Satan. It really would have been impressive if they could have gone further with it. And there's things that they kind of like this description of Eternium, this mineral or this element Eternium. They kind of leave that off to the side. They don't really explore that too much. I am hoping for an extended edition. This movie did weigh in at only about 2 hours, 5 minutes, which is impressive because for whatever reason, most comic book movies have been in the near 3 hour range as late. I'm not disappointed that it was shorter, but I would love if there's an extended cut that ends up getting released on DVD or, on Blu-ray or disc, we'll say, because 4K, right? Fuck that shit, but whatever. I'd really welcome that. And that happens often, especially with DC movies, thankfully. So there's things that don't get enough explanation. But again, when you're dealing with taking a comic book from page to screen, okay, and you're doing so directly without making it, without bothering to care about, like movie sensibilities, it still works. Like it fits like a comic book narrative would. Just like Black Adam's origin, even though it will get explored further later on in the movie, not a lot of time is spent with that. Great! Because the origin of most characters was usually an afterthought. If a character became a big deal, then maybe 15 years later, they would get an origin miniseries. And fuck, some of the greatest comic book characters of all time, we never even had an origin story for them. Think, for example, Wolverine. When did we get the origin comic? 99, 2000, 2001? And then when people found out, they got pissed off. You don't need the origin stories. This works as it is. The action was really solid. The music, Lauren Balfe did the music. I've got to listen to the soundtrack some more. I don't know. I was just enjoying the movie. Admittedly, the music, none of it, I didn't feel like any of it really hit any serious heights, but I do want to listen to the soundtrack independently and see just sort of if I miss something. But Lauren Balfe does great work. Of course, he's done scores for the Mission Impossible movies and others. He can do bombast. I really don't have any complaints with it. I just don't necessarily have anything big to say on the matter, which is fine. So, again, the directing was good. Script overall, like I said, was good, except for the lack of real motivation for the villain. Hopefully we'll get some of that, maybe more in an extended version or something along those lines. The action in the movie. The action was great. Here's the problem, though. They made such a big deal about The Rock, how he's not wearing a muscle suit, like perhaps George Clooney would, in Batman and Robin or something like that. There's no muscle suit here. It's his body, and he's just that larger than life, and he is. It's a shame they didn't let him actually get down and dirty, and really get in some classic punches and whatever else. And you can say, well, would a god really do that? Okay, maybe not. There's an argument for that. But this is the one case where, okay, yeah, but you've got The Rock. He doesn't have to do the people's elbow or anything, but, he could do a suplex maybe, or something, some kicks. I don't know. And that didn't happen, but that's just what I wanted it. I totally get the creative decision, but that's just what I wanted. I also felt like he was flying a little too much, but again, this is more of that make him appear to be a god, and they're really delivering there. So those are merely what I wanted out of it, because again, our lead actor is The Rock. If it was somebody else, I probably wouldn't have even wanted these things, and I would have said, oh, it's all great. So I want to keep that in perspective. Beyond that, lots of, there were a lot of nods and Easter eggs within it. Also, the main female character in the movie, that being Adriana Tomaz, as they called her in this. Now that's clearly Andrea Thomas, Andrea Thomas is the character in comic books, and if you remember from the 70s, Shazam Hour was the character of Isis, who is another Egyptian god type character similar to Black Adam, also as powerful as Superman, if not more so. So they were setting her up, to become Isis. And in fact, those 4 prequel comics that I mentioned, I think they're setting her up even more for that in those. So, that works, that we could get Isis in the future. Of course, if you've read Black Adam comics or Justice Society comics over the past 20 years, that Isis becomes Black Adam's wife. Now, the only part that's kind of different is her son was the character of Amon. In comics, Amon is Isis, Andrea Thomas's brother, and he becomes Osiris, who also has the powers of Black Adam. We'll see if Amon gets set up to become Osiris. But anyway, it seems like they were teeing up Adriana as, becoming Isis. It's subtle hints, but it's there. The other thing is, you kind of knew, even if you didn't know ahead of time, you kind of knew Superman was going to show up. There were constant ribbings at Superman where, Black Adam gets woken up and he's in Amon's room, and Amon has superhero posters all over the place, and when he wakes up, he zaps the face off of Superman. There's another point where Black Adam is fighting a character in that apartment in Amon's bedroom, and Amon has the Superman, the House of L crest on his door, and you see Black Adam's fist punch through the crest, which is totally, like an Easter egg, an appeal to the imagery of Doomsday, from Death of Superman, when Doomsday's fist is going through the bloody crest of Superman. So lots of nice little nods like that I really, really dug, that they put in there, that they didn't have to, but I mean, you could have said it was a little over the top because I think other people could pick it up, but like not everybody would know that was representative of the same shot of when, Doomsday's fist was coming through. So, it worked. Like there was pretty much everything that I wanted out of this was in this. Even the character of Amanda Waller, of course, from the Suicide Squad films, was involved. That was a nice callback. This is meant to be a Phase 1 film. I mean, unfortunately, in this sense, they're copying Marvel, where they're going to do phases of movies, that lead to a big film. It's a pretty good bet we're going to end up with some kind of Justice Society film, which I think is fine just to get past the Justice League thing, and you still have plenty of credibility with the Justice Society. So why not go that distance and go in that direction? But this is the start of basically a new continuity for DC movies, and I think it's a great start. It's a phenomenal start. It may not be as good a movie as Iron Man was, but it's a fine, with plenty of fidelity, translation of Black Adam to the screen, of the DC universe to the screen, while still paying some attention to what came before, particularly again with the character of Amanda Waller, as well as the appearance of Henry Cavill as Superman. So I dig it. I love what they're doing here. I think that they've got a winner on their hands. I have not looked at what the box office numbers for the weekend were. I'm going to pull that up right now. And it looks like worldwide it's done 143 million. So not bad for a 3-day opener. Again, theaters are still kind of skittish, I suppose. And everybody's talking about this resurgence of this thing that begins with the letter C and whatever else. So, who knows what they're going to look at for this. But I don't think that that's a bad opening. I mean, the budget, I'm sure that's not even making budget, and they need to do at least triple the budget. But maybe it's something that'll be on a slow burn and give it a little bit of time, and it'll hit those numbers. But I don't think this is, regardless of the performance of this, I don't think it's going to slow down the plans that DC has, because they do have plans, even though Warner Brothers / HBO / Discovery / whatever is in a fucking mess right now. I mean, you've got a vehicle with arguably the biggest actor in the world, that being The Rock. You're not going to just let that go, even if you get a little bit of a poor performer, opening up. But we'll see what ends up doing throughout the week. And I think a lot of this is going to depend upon word of mouth. I mean, there's a massive marketing machine behind this. I mean, even like Under Armour has done an entire Black Adam training line, and the shit's great. So there's a lot of push here, and it's kind of non-traditional, and I like that. And we'll see what happens. But as far as a rating, I mean, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I mean, it's certainly not it's not a comic book movie on the level of the 78 Superman, or, the original, the 89 Batman, or even Iron Man or something like that. I'm not going to say it's on that level, but it's close. And what it does really, really well. And man, The Rock was this is just a tailor-made role for him. Okay, they didn't give him the pointy ears, but whatever. It works. And I really, really, really dig what they're pulling off here. So anyway, go check it out. I think it's a very worthwhile watch, but you've got to keep it in perspective that this is not like what is now considered a traditional comic book movie. This is a comic book movie that literally lifted the panels and put them on the screen. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but it's also not what people are used to. So anyway, I will end this episode of Sovereign Tech with that. And until next week, I will see all of you on the other side.